All right, thank you for joining me on this episode of The Gospel Truth. I'm your host, Marlon Wilson, and over here at The Gospel Truth, we are engaging the culture of Christian truth, and I thank you for joining me tonight on this very, very exciting episode. I got two heavyweights, man, two heavyweights about to go at it, and we're going to be debating, does the Bible teach free will? But before I bring those guys in, I do want to encourage you to go ahead and like and follow and subscribe to The Gospel Truth. It's on YouTube and on Facebook. If you're one of those individuals who are on the go ahead and jump over to the podcast, which I have is on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and Stitcher. So go ahead and subscribe there if you want to just listen to it and not necessarily watch it. But, over here at The Gospel Truth, we like to engage the culture of Christian truth. And I do that with debates, interviews, and Bible lessons. If you haven't checked out my Bible lessons, they off the chain. So go ahead and check them out. I want you guys to go ahead and dive into that. It's sort of an interesting time because one of my all-time favorite great basketball players passed away yesterday, Mr. Kobe Bryant. And it hit me kind of hard, It's one of those things where, I don't necessarily know the guy. We don't have a personal relationship, but it's not only did it hit me as far as from a personal aspect, but it gave me a definite understanding of how fragile life is. Kobe Bryant is one of those individuals who was looked at as almost like a superhuman in certain aspects, but nonetheless, him and 8 others passed away. And I think we should all take that into consideration as we look at our lives and how our relationship is with Christ, and how we should look at life in a way that's glorifying to God, and how we should live our life to magnify God in everything that we do, because we don't know when that last hour, that last minute, and last second is there. So with that said, let me go ahead and go over a couple announcements before I bring Mr. Hernandez and Mr. Slick in. Let me go ahead and get this up. All right, coming up, January 30th, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I have James Martin and Warren McGrew, and they're going to be dating is Total Depravity Biblical. So be on the lookout for that. Go ahead and make sure you keep that on your calendar. February 1st, 2020, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I have Miles Patrick as a Hebrew Israelite and Ricky Cronin, who is a Christian, and they'll be debating is Jesus God and the interpretation of Deuteronomy 28. So that's one that's been coming. It was supposed to happen a long time ago, but it keeps getting pushed back. So hopefully February 1st, it should happen. So be on the lookout for that. Coming up, February 3rd, I have Eric Murphy, who is an atheist, and Tyler Vela, who is a Christian. They'll be having a discussion, what is atheism? And that's coming up once again, February 3rd, 2020 at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And lastly, I have an interview coming up. Pastor John Speed, and we'll be talking about his ministry and abortion in America, the effectiveness of fighting abortion, and major concerns for Christians. And that's coming up February 7th, 2020 at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So once again, be on the lookout for all the shows that are coming up, and head over there and like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on anything. All right. So with that said, let me go ahead and bring these fellas in real quick. What is going on, fellas? How y'all doing?
Hey, how you doing? It's good to be here.
Matt,
there we go. I'm doing all right.
Yeah, I was about to say, Matt, you gonna say hi to everybody? Oh, what's going on here? All right.
Good. Just copping an attitude tonight. That's all. No.
Thank you, too, for joining me. I'm glad you guys were able to take time at your busy schedule to go ahead and jump on.
Yeah, my first name is Sonny, and I am the director for Reforming America Ministries. Glad to be here today to debate this important topic.
All right. You didn't even let my little name tag jump up there, Mr. Sonny. Did it very quick. All right. So, Matt Slick, if you can, go ahead and give a quick introduction to anybody that don't necessarily know who you are.
Matt Slick, ex-pastor, seminary graduate, started CARM almost 25 years ago, and been doing apologetics for about 40 years. And you can check out carm.org as the website. There you go. That's quick and slick.
That was quick, very quick. Cool beans, y'all. Cool beans. All right. Thank you both. All right. So today we're going to be debating, does the Bible teach free will? So the format of this debate will be a 10-minute opening statement by each party. Take as long as you can, all the way up to 10 minutes. If you go shorter than that, that's fine. And then we'll jump into a 60-minute extemporaneous conversation between you and both of you guys. And then we'll jump into any closing remarks that you have. And then we'll have Q&A from the audience. Sounds good?
Sounds good.
All right. Start with Matt Slick, if you don't mind. Can you go ahead and give a 10-minute opening?
All right, I'll give it a shot. Here goes. All right, the debate topic is a bit open-ended. Does the Bible teach free will? Now, the topic is not restricted just to people. It says, does the Bible teach free will? It's not restricted just to animals either. Furthermore, it logically must include God, since the Bible speaks of God. God has free will, therefore the Bible teaches free will. Since we're made in the image of God, Genesis 1:26, our free will is a reflection of God's free will, though an imperfect one, as the scriptures clearly reveal. Nevertheless, we must define free will with God as our standard and include Him in our definition. However, Sonny, Dr. Hernandez, defines free will in terms of people and excludes God as the standard, then he's adopting humanist principles in his debate. Humanists use people as the standard of right and wrong, and in the context of our discussion, they define free will by using mankind as the standard, and that's not biblical. Now, I know that Dr. Hernandez is not a humanist, and I'm not accusing him of that. It's just that we ought to use God as a standard of what is true, not man. And that way will be far less likely to fall into error. Now, in light of this, I start with God, and I ask, does God have free will? Yes, God has free will. Therefore, and I can connect the logical dots later, I define free will as the ability to make willing, voluntary, and uncoerced decisions that are consistent with one's nature. Now, I've gone over this many times in the past with all kinds of people. That's the definition I use. This definition includes God, and it's not humanistic in its basis. Therefore, the Bible teaches free will because it teaches that God has free will. But if Dr. Hernandez denies that God has free will, then we would have a really serious problem to address, which would be something worth discussing at a later time. However, if Dr. Hernandez affirms that God has free will, then he's conceded the debate and acknowledged that the Bible teaches free will. Now, I suspect that Dr. Hernandez will not appreciate this opening statement and my comments here. He will not concede the debate, and that he will focus on human free will as it relates to God's sovereign decrees. In a phone text message to me, he said, libertarian free will is a superstition which maintains that the will of man is uncaused and not free will notion. I would define it the same way you do, speaking of me, and to explain ad nauseum, I reject it because, in your definition, you import the word free. You argue, he's speaking of me here, you argue that free will is compatible with God's absolutely sovereignty. Well, I do not. I reject the idea of freedom that is relative to God. I'm not sure what he means by that last statement, but that's all right. As you can see from his quote, his emphasis is on human free will as it relates to God's sovereignty. Okay, but again, that's not exactly what the debate topic is. Nevertheless, I could not get, and I mean no disrespect to him, I could not get a precise definition from Dr. Hernandez on what free will is. So I'm not really sure what he's denying, and it'll become more clear later, I'm sure. But perhaps he will offer a clear and concise definition later. But remember, it must include God's nature and his free will, or it's a humanistic definition. Now, I affirm that a person is free to act according to his nature without coercion, and that his free acts are consistent with God's nature and God's sovereignty, Furthermore, logically, it is the case that a person is free to act according to his desires within God's sovereignty, or it is not the case that he is free to act according to his desires within God's sovereignty. There is no third option. It's either the case or not the case. Both statements cannot be true and it cannot be true at the same time and in the same sense. Cannot be false, I should say, or be true. A person either possesses free will or it is not the case that he possesses free will. Remember, I define free will as the ability to make willing, voluntary, and uncoerced decisions that are consistent with one's nature. This includes God as well as man. In my opinion, this debate is guided by our definitions and the justification of those definitions. Now, I would say that if a person is free to act according to his desires, then he has free will. If a person is not free to act according to his desires, then he does not have free will. But I have to ask, if a person does not have free will, then how is he morally responsible for any actions he may perform? In my article on CARM, titled, "What is Compatibilism and Is it Biblical?" I open the article with the statement, quote, "Compatibilism is the position that human free will is compatible with God's absolute divine sovereignty," close quote. But in our text chat on our phones, Dr. Hernandez said, quote, "Matt, I reject the notion of libertarian freedom and your definition of compatibilism. In other words, I deny the belief that one can act apart from divine influence or that Yahweh has not predetermined our actions." Well, I also reject libertarian free will, and I speak against it. I also deny that. I'm with him on that. So I also say here, as I reject libertarian free will, that a person can act. I reject the idea that okay, let me phrase this. I reject libertarian free will, the position that a person can act apart from God's divine influence. I reject that, and he does too, and good. But he also rejects the idea that human free will is compatible with God's absolute divine sovereignty. Now, maybe I'm misunderstanding him, but this is what I see. He denies that people can act independently of God, libertarianism, and also seems to deny that people don't act independently of God, compatibilism. I find this to be problematic, perhaps even contradictory. But then it is possible that I don't understand his position, and I hope he'll clear it up for me when he's speaking. Now, I want to say something I think is important, and it's very relevant to our discussion. I hope he would agree that God himself has free will. Now, Jesus is God in flesh. Therefore, Jesus, the human person, must have free will. If Dr. Hernandez denies that Jesus has free will, then he's denying an essential quality of the divine nature within Christ, divine free will. If he affirms that Jesus has free will, then he's affirming that human beings have free will since Jesus was and still is human, and we are made in God's image. Furthermore, we know that Jesus came to do the will of the Father, John 5:36, John 6:38, 17:4. Since the decrees of God include Christ's incarnation and ministry, and since Jesus by definition must have free will because he's God in flesh, then the Bible teaches that human free will exists and is consistent with God's sovereign decrees. If Dr. Hernandez denies this, then he must also deny the free will, the divine nature of the word ascribed to the person of Jesus. This is dealing with a doctrine called the communicatio idiomatum, and this would be a serious problem. So to conclude by saying that I hope Sonny will accomplish four things. One, that he would provide a precise definition of what free will is that includes God as the standard and that does not restrict the definition just to fallen men and thereby adopt a humanist principle. Two, that he will clear up the apparent contradiction that he denies people can act independently of God and that people also do not act independently of God, since he denies both libertarianism and compatibilism. And again, it's quite probable or possible. I don't understand his position. Three, that he explains how people who do not have free will are responsible for their sins if they are not freely committing them. And four, that he tells us if Jesus, who is God in flesh, has free will or not, and how, if Jesus has free will, is that compatible or not compatible with God's sovereign decrees. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Matt, for the opening statement. Appreciate you. All right, Sonny Hernandez, you got 10 minutes for your opening statement.
All right, Marlon, thank you so much for the opportunity to debate this important topic. And again, I'm not really sure why it's even brought up, do you believe that if God or Jesus has free will it believe God and Jesus have? Sure, that's even being asked. Clearly, I believe only God and Christ have free will. I reject human free will, and what I'll do is take a few moments to explain my position. First, I'll talk about human free will, which, of course, I'll address libertarianism and compatibilism. Libertarianism that I deny because it's as Matt said, it's a superstitious notion which maintains that one can, again, make choices, outside of divine influence. In other words, it has not been predetermined and it is uncaused. And I think about all the dangerous implications to holding to a position of libertarian freedom. In other words, that would mean that there's no antecedent power from God that determines man's actions. And I also believe it's problematic because of the fact that it would mean that man's choices are untrammeled and there's no causal efficacy in God's foreknowledge. Now, I remember a popular quote from Gordon Clark, and I hope I don't take him out of context, but I remember reading a book one time, I believe it was Religion, Reason, and Revelation, where Gordon Clark said that in order to know if the will has not been predetermined, you would literally have to know every cause in the universe in order to be conscious of it. Therefore, you would have to literally be omniscient. And I think that's a good point that he brings up. Now, in regards to compatibilism, here is my contention with Matt's position. And again, referring to Matt's article, what is compatibilism and is it biblical? Matt says free will is compatible with God's absolute sovereignty. So in regards to this topic, well, certainly I believe we make choices, we are responsible, and I believe we act according to our nature, but I reject this word that Matt imports, free. That is my point of contention. I do not believe human beings are free relative to God. That is my contention. Again, as I said before, I only believe God in the triune Godhead is free, not man. So I'm not even sure why that's even a question, whether or not if I believe it or not. Now I find, and again, I'm not going to accuse Matt of this, but I find that a lot of compatibilists, that every time you throw Bible verses, or you use a Bible verse, for example, let's just say the passage where it says that God is the ultimate cause of David inciting Israel. But of course, David was the efficient cause. He's the secondary cause, but God, again, judged him for something that he ultimately caused to take place. Typically, I hear a lot of compatibilists, every time they run into passages like this, they immediately say these silly little comments. Mystery, paradox, antinomy. It's divisive. We have to be careful teaching doctrines like this. Or we don't know. Our finite minds can't comprehend it. Or God merely permits, allows, or lets it happen. I don't say God permits, allows, or let happens. I argue that God freely and unchangeably ordained all things whatsoever shall come to pass. So here's my definition of God in regards to this topic, because I'm glad that Matt made that point, which I should be happy to address. First of all, I believe in a term called theological determinism. Now, theological determinism is not some abstract philosophical concept. It is a biblical argument. For instance, if you take a look at what took place with Amaziah in the Bible, he was victorious in battle. The Bible says then he went and gave adulation to false gods, and then the prophet appeared to him and said that the Lord has determined against you. He has determined against you. Also see precedent for the term theological determinism also in the book of Isaiah. If you remember in Isaiah how it says that Judah shall be a terror in all of Egypt, and anyone who speaks of it, the Bible says that they shall be afraid because God has determined against it. And you're the wicked king, or I guess you could call it the Antichrist that's described in the book of Daniel, how he exalted himself and he wind up cursing the God of gods. And the Bible explicitly says, for God has determined, reference to it was determined. And of course, we see this in the New Testament, where the Bible says that Jesus, he went out as it was determined. And woe to the one for whom the Son of Man is betrayed. So again, the term theological determinism is a theological argument. It is a local argument. To give a quick disclaimer about my position is this. I do recognize there are a lot of what I call internet philosophers. And again, I'm not accusing Matt of saying these things, but a lot of these internet philosophers will say that if you hold to theological determinism, that you believe in fatalism or behaviorism, that you're exactly what atheists believe. Now, let me tell you why those kinds of arguments don't prove the point they're desperately trying to make. All it proves is that they're theologically ignorant and they degenerate to the level of name calling since they're not able to define terms, and they're honestly too scared to debate the topic. So I'll tell you right now, I reject determinism because, again, most professing atheists believe in some form of naturalistic or humanistic or scientific determinism, okay? Not all, but some. And again, fatalism or behaviorism, I don't believe that our choices are determined by some external stimuli or by some impersonal force, and there is no regard for choices, no regard for means. I reject that. Again, I believe in theological determinism, and let me explain how when it says that, for by him all things were made in heaven, whether thrones or dominions, principalities or powers, all things are made through him and for him. And it also tells us in Romans, for of him, through him, and to him are all things. Therefore, when I read these passages, this right here is why I don't argue that God has passive knowledge or a passive decree. No, I believe God is the cause. I believe he controls, he sustains, and he governs all things. And no man can thwart this. And nothing happens outside of God's will and power. That is my position, because again, when we read the text where it says, by him, all things are created in heaven and earth, think about this text is teaching us. We're learning from this text that literally God in Christ has conceived, has detailed and provided the blueprints, and has created. It is the goal of all things. To God be the glory. That is my theological convictions and why I reject any notion of libertarian or contra cause of freedom, and even the so-called compatibilist position, which I believe is a philosophical cop-out where you're trying to hold on to free will and argue that it's compatible with divine sovereignty. Well, free from what? Anytime you import the word free and of being relative to God, I have to ask, free from what? I agree that we make choices, that we act according to our nature, that we have wills, but I reject the term freedom that is relative to God, because only God is free. And as I said before, he is the ultimate cause and the one who controls and governs all things. That is my theological conviction. Thank you.
All right, thank you, fellas, both for the opening statements. All right, now, so we're going to go ahead into our cross-examination portion where you two will have just a discussion back and forth. I will be in the background and do outside moderating as needed. If I feel that the conversation is drifting off into a subject matter that is irrelevant to the conversation, to the subject matter, then I will step in and get everybody back on track. Other than that, you guys have the stage and you got it. Hey, Matt, I think you muted, Matt.
There we go. Sorry about that. Sonny, you were breaking up a little bit, so if you said something and I don't get it right when I'm talking, that's why.
I understand.
But at any rate, do you want to ask me anything? Or, I mean, since I opened, I don't know if you want to, or we can, I don't know.
I'll tell you what, man, I'll be respectful to you. I believe in showing respect to, so by all means, let you go first. You pick and choose what you want.
Okay. Yeah, you were breaking up. So if I say, could you repeat that? I'm not playing any games with you. Just having trouble understanding. Sometimes you are breaking up. And I think if you have a speakerphone, you're speaking into, right?
No, sir. I'm just actually using my computer speakers that are in there. Are you having trouble hearing me? That might be why.
I'm having trouble hearing you. You're breaking up on my end some. But anyway, that's okay. We'll work through it. Okay. So, okay. Can you offer a definition of free will that includes both God and man?
I believe I already did, Matt. Abundantly clear that I reject human free will. I do not believe that our will is ever free that's relative to God. I believe only God has free will because he is the prime agent, he is most free, and he is the ultimate cause of all things, and he sustains and governs and controls everything. Only God has free will. I do not believe man's will is ever free relative to God.
But you didn't answer the question. Can you offer a definition of free will that includes both God and man? You said you reject human free will. Well, we've got to define it first. So I know what you're rejecting.
God has free will. Only God is free. God is the ultimate cause who has sustained and governed and controls all things. Only God has free will. In other words, I will define theological determinism as this. God determines all things, means and the ends. And I'll even go so far as to say that includes man's choices, actions, man's decisions. That is my definition for God. I do not believe that human beings have freedom that is relative to God, and that cannot be proven from the Bible.
Is he breaking up for you, Marlon?
Yeah, he broke up a little bit. I think it may be a bandwidth issue, but let's try to see if we can figure out what that is. But
because the problem is that I have to ask the question again because you broke up enough. So if I miss a word or two, I don't understand, and I apologize for that. But it's technology; it happens sometime.
Sure.
So, okay. See, when I define free will, I say free will is the ability to make choices consistent with your nature that are not forced. So that includes God, because God acts in a manner consistent. I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. I'll let you finish. I'm sorry.
Okay. So that includes God, because God acts in a manner consistent with his nature. He cannot sin. He cannot lie. He's holy. He's only free to act in a manner consistent with what he is. There is no standard of anything outside of him by which he must operate or submit to. So he's a standard of what freedom is. And we have that similar view. Now, it's pretty complicated. I think you know that these discussions get into quite a lot of different sub-nuances of nature of free will and determinism and different views and stuff, but we won't get into all that. So that's what I'm saying is, my definition includes God and man, but I haven't heard a definition that you say free will is this, because what you are doing is say free will is you reject this and that. That's not what it is. What do you,
okay,
how
Matt,
do you define?
let me say this one more time.
I'll write it down.
I think the problem is I've explained the definition of it. I think the problem is you just either don't understand it or you don't like it. Let me explain one more time. I believe only God has free will because God determines all things, means and the ends, and that includes even our choices, our actions, and our decisions. I am not going to deny God's free will with man because I do not believe man has free will. I reject the notions of contra-causal freedom as it is defined by most Pelagians and semi-Pelagians, and I reject compatibilism on the basis that I do not agree with you importing the freedom sentence. I believe we have a will, we make choices. I do not believe they're coerced, because coerced implies that God does not have total control over his creation, and that presupposes that an individual has the ability to reject God's sovereign plan. Therefore, I reject the idea of coercion, and I also reject the idea that one is free relative to God.
Are you saying that free will means that it is God who determines everything? That's what free will is?
I believe, again, Matt, I try to make a distinction between God's free will, and I make the distinction that man does not have free will because God has determined all things. Yes, Matt, I believe God determines all things. All things. Nothing is independent of him.
Yeah.
Nothing happens outside of his will and power. No metaphysical cause in the universe that is independent from God that causes something to take place outside of God's divine plan. I don't believe in that whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, Ephesians 1:11. So you would deny that you have free will?
I do not have free will relative to God, man. No, I have relative to
Yeah.
God. So again, Matt, let me explain to you what I mean, Matt. Let me try to make my point clear. Matt, right now I can tell you, Matt, you do not control my actions. You do not control my thoughts. You are not going to determine my decisions. Therefore, in a sense, I am free from you. Matt, I am not from God. How can I have relative to God if I'm making the argument today that God has determined all things? And God freely and changeably ordained all things whatsoever shall come to pass. That is why I reject your definition when you import the word freedom in your definition of compatibilism.
I'm starting to get an idea of what it is you say free will is. You're defining free will as being free from something. Well, I don't. Necessarily, I say free will is the ability to act consistently with our own nature and our essence, as God does, and that there's no coercion. We're free from being forced. And I think you would agree if someone, put a gun in your hand and put your hand towards somebody and forced you to pull the trigger, that's not your will, and you're not guilty. You're not culpable.
Yeah, Matt, no, listen. I think you're trying to. I see your point, but you're making an argument that I'm making. I don't agree that that God is coercing us. Again, because coercion implies that God does not have control over his creation, and it also implies that an individual can resist God's decree. Again, I don't believe that anyone can resist the decree of God. Remember something, I believe that there is causal efficacy in God's foreknowledge. If God ordains something, it shall come to pass, and no man can thwart that. And there is no power or there's no competing power that can, again, alter that. So again, Matt, the problem that I think you're going to have to be able to address is the fact of in your definition, and you import the word free will is compatible with God's absolute divine sovereignty. So my question to you is, free from what?
Free from coercion.
Free? Okay, Matt, but that's the problem, Matt. How are you free? The issue is not the definition. Then you're going to have to change your definition, because your definition says human free will is compatible with God's absolute divine sovereignty. Change your definition then to say that human free will is free relative to coercion. Don't say free with God's absolute divine sovereignty, because again, you're going to have a fundamental problem because of the fact that Proverbs 16, for instance, Proverbs 16 literally tells us, Matt, it says that the preparations of the heart and the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. It tells us in Proverbs 21:1 that the king's heart in the hand of God, like the rivers of waters, he moves it whichever way he pleases. So literally, God is controlling our thoughts, our actions, even that which comes from the tongue. Therefore, you can't say that our will is free relative to divine sovereignty when it is God's divine sovereignty which determined your thoughts, your actions, and your decisions. That is my contention with your position.
Yeah, you beg the question and assuming that your definition is the right one, and that's the problem, is we're having a problem with definitions. See, I'm trying to use a definition that's based out of God's character, nature, and essence, and you're not. You're trying to say that man is so different than God that he can't have any freedom. Well, it's just a matter of definition. See, God is free. We're made in his image. We reflect some sort of freedom. He's not coerced. That's what the definition of freedom is. I started with God. You keep going back to the idea, I think, of what man is. And I always stand against that kind of a thing. No, go to God first. Define free will that includes God. But I think the way you're doing it is interesting. I'm still not quite sure what you are getting at, but my note says you define free will as something that you're free from. So free from contingency, free from external whatever, something, and only God has that. That's your definition.
Matt, let me say this one more time. As I said before, Matt, let me just try to make it as simplistic as practical for our viewers. Okay, and I'll put it in the most basic, rudimentary terms as possible. Only God has free will. Only God has free will. Man does not have free will relative to God. So for instance, again, Matt, I'll try to reiterate this ad nauseum. your definition, you said human will is compatible with God's absolute divine sovereignty. So you're going to have to prove how it's free from God's divine sovereignty if I'm arguing that it is God's divine sovereign plan that determines man's actions. You can't hold on to both of that. You can't say God determined all things, but then say man is free. Well, how can man be free if God has determined all things? Okay, that is the fundamental difference. The reality, Matt, is you have an skewed definition, and I say that respectfully to you. I'm not trying to stir a pejorative debate with you, but again, you're how man's is free from God's divine sovereignty when I've already stressed. Let me throw a few examples to you, Matt. Think about something with when we go to the Bible, okay? And you take a look at examples in the Bible where, let's just say, for instance, in the Testament. So every time we see, like, for instance, our works. For instance, how does the Bible describe it? So in the book, it actually tells us in Ephesians, it says, for we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God prepared beforehand. Think about how it tells us in John 15. It says, you did not choose me, but I chose you, appointed you to go forth and bear fruit. You were appointed. We were prepared beforehand. Or another example, when it says, when God works in you to will and to work. So again, I'm arguing that God determines all things. Only God is free. Let me say this again, Matt. Man is not free from God, ever. You keep bringing up coercion when I'm not making that argument. I'm not arguing that God is coercing us. If God determines all things, trust me, it will take place. Nothing can thwart it. Not a single thing can thwart it, because nothing happens outside of his will and his power. So again, Matt, what I'm asking you is I can show you innumerable references exegetically from the Bible where it explicitly and pervasively teaches that God determines all things, thoughts, actions, decisions, and nothing happens outside of God's will and power. You're going to have to show, how is man free from that? How? In what way is man free from God's divine sovereignty? That's something you're not able to prove, Matt. That's something I'm asking you. Show me in the Bible where, instead of accusing me of begging the question, what I'm asking you, you show me in the Bible where it says that man is free from God's power, all ears.
I've never taught that.
Then why do you say human free will is compatible with absolute divine sovereignty? And notice, Matt, you say that you've never taught that. Matt, this is all you teach. Have you actually read your article on compatibilism? And let me tell you something else you said. You also said in the paragraph where it says, but to this I would say that our fallenness is due to the free will rebellion of Adam. Free will rebellion of Adam. I'd like, again, you to show me, Matt, where does the Bible say that Adam had free will? Where does the Bible say that Adam's will was free from God? All ears. And not to mention, Matt, before you answer that question, let me give you one more just to show you, because you say you've never taught that. In addition, you also say this is a stuff, but it's in the same article, Compatibilism. You state this, I quote, we see here that God predestined but not caused people to do sinful things. And you cite, of all things, Acts 4:27 through 28, where it says, where it uses the word pro, okay? And so you think of the term pro orizo, determined beforehand. So when you say that God has predestined but not caused, are you saying there's no causal efficacy in God's predestining plan? And out of curiosity, I'd like to know how God can predestine something but not be the ultimate cause. So again, Matt, two questions for you, since you say you've never taught this. Please show me in the Bible where it teaches explicitly that Adam had free will from God in the garden. And I'd also like you to show me exactly how God can predestine but not the ultimate cause of people doing sinful things. Please, those two simple questions.
If it's okay with you, I would ask that you be polite. because when you ask me if I've read my own article, that's kind of a snarky approach, and it's really not conducive to proper discussion and proper debate.
I mean, no disrespect. I'm just asking a question, Matt. No disrespect.
Well, it is, and you know that shouldn't have any place here. Okay, just so you know, yes, I have read the article that I wrote. Logically, that would be the correct answer. But you see, the issue here deals with the definitions. And this is why, I don't know if you've seen what I do and how I work. I believe in definitions, definitions, definitions. The more precise a definition, the better we're able to answer questions and expose error and find things. And when I ask you what free will is, you say, I did this. I'm taking notes as you're talking. I said, well, what is free will? For like the third or fourth time. And you said, only God has free will. Man does not have free will relative to God. I didn't ask if only God has free will or not. I didn't ask if man has free will relative to God or not. I asked, what is free will? And then I tried to help by saying, I believe free will is this. And you're saying it's a wrong definition. Well, you haven't justified that it's a wrong definition. And what you're doing is simply assuming and asserting that your definition is the right one. And there are ramifications to what you're saying. Now, so I don't agree with what you're saying and how you're defining it because I've not heard your definition of what free will is yet. And without that, I don't know what to argue with you about.
Okay, let me repeat myself then, Matt, and tell me if this will suffice for you. When I reference free will in the context of God, okay, I believe it is a biblical position which maintains that God has freely determined all things, both means and ends. And this includes, again, man's choices and decisions. That is about a simplistic definition as they can possibly get to. Earlier in our discussion, Matt, I'm well aware, okay, Matt, about what contra-causal freedom is, Matt. I made it very clear that contra-causal freedom is a delirious contains that the will has been determined or uncaused. That is a definition for contra-causal freedom. In regards to compatibilism, Matt, again, I'm well aware compatibilism is a position that you hold to. It's not a position that I hold to, but I'm perfectly fine with your definition, and I reject your definition. And I'll tell you why I reject your definition, because again, I don't believe that we have God who is absolutely sovereign, who determines all things. Therefore, if God determines all things, I don't believe man is free. Therefore, in your definition. Now, again, I guess with all due respect, Matt, and again, I'll give you my disclaimer. I mean, no disrespect for you, but my opinion, maybe you should think about clarifying your own definition. Because again, as I said before, Matt, when the questions that I have for you are very simple, Matt. And again, go back to the questions that I really would like to hear answered, respectfully to you. In your article, you said, free will rebellion of Adam. Therefore, I'm just going to apply common sense. You're saying rebel free. So my question, again, my first question to you, can you show me in the Bible where Adam rebelled freely? And again, you're going to have to show me how God is not the ultimate cause of Adam's rebellion. It's a simple question, Matt. You tell me what you mean when you say free will rebellion of Adam. And the second question I have, again, because this is from your, you said, we see here that God predestined but not caused people to do sinful things. So my second question, if God predestined, if he decided beforehand for individuals to do sinful things, how is he not the cause of it? Again, I'm going to repeat your words. We see here that God predestined but not caused people to do sinful things, and you cite Acts 4:27, which is a passage that refers to the Gentiles, the people of Israel. and the Herod and Pontius to do as your hand had predestined. Predestined is the word that I am referring to in regards to the contention I have with your definition. Again, respectfully, I'd like to hear a response to those two questions.
You were breaking up some there. I'm trying to get your definition. You seem to say that we have wills, and how you define it is that a will is not independent of God. That's what you're saying. That there's no such thing as free will in people. Only in God we have wills, but our wills are not independent of God. Right?
That's correct. That's correct.
That's what you should have said earlier. I agree with that. I agree that our wills are not independent of God. I believe this. See, I'm a Calvinist. I've been defending it for close to 30 years. I believe that God is in sovereign control of all things and nothing occurs without his will, whether it be decretive, prescriptive, or permissive. They're direct and indirect causes of things. But I'll say one thing. God does not force people or cause them to sin. If he causes them to sin, then he's the cause of sin, which would be a contradiction against his own nature. God is holy. He cannot sin. How could you, I hope you're not saying that God himself causes people to sin. And if you do say that, how does he hold them responsible? And if you try and give me an answer and say, well, he does, then I'm going to go to Acts 4:27-28, where God predestines people, and then go to Acts 2:23, where it says, and you are the ones who nailed him to the cross. They were the ones held responsible. So I'm a little bit confused here, but I really do believe definitions are critical.
Let me just say this. Happy to answer the question. Easily answer the questions you just asked, but respectfully, I'd like a response to the two questions that I asked you. You keep going back to other things. I'm asking you, would you please respond to the two questions that I asked you? Let me repeat them very briefly one more time. I said, can you show me in the book where it teaches that Adam rebelled freely? Again, that's my first question. Your words was the free will rebellion of Adam. I would like for you, again, not to run off into another conversation, but respectfully, very respectfully and humbly to you to provide to me a response to that question. And the second question I have for you, again, is you said God predestined but not caused people to do sinful things. My question is, how could God predestine someone to do sinful things but not be the ultimate cause? Especially since you said Acts 4:27-28. Now, respectfully, Matt, I've asked this probably 3 times. Would you please give a response to my questions? And I can promise you, I will gladly respond to any question because I'm not running from nothing you're asking me today.
Okay, I think I got your questions written down. You are breaking up quite a bit. You said you want me to say or to show in the Bible where Adam rebelled freely.
Freely, yes. How did Adam rebel freely?
That would depend on what we mean by free. Hence, the necessity of definitions.
Tell me what your definition is then. That's what you. What do you believe? How do you believe he rebelled freely? I'm asking you.
That he acted in a manner consistent with his nature. He was not forced to do anything. He freely, consistently, with what was in him, he chose to rebel against God.
Okay. Did God determine for him to fall in the garden?
I'm not being... not trying to be difficult, but it depends on what you mean by determine. If you mean determine is that God made him do it, no. If you mean determine in that God by his sovereign decrees arranged all things and knew that this is what's going to happen because God had ordained it, and that in the indirect ordination of God, and indirect means in his prescriptive will and his permissive will, he allowed it, then sure. And even the allowance is something that God determines by his free will.
Okay. Now, Matt, let me just say this real quick. Again, you're presumptuously arguing that somehow determinism means coercion. Again, as I said before, Matt, in my definition, I told you I rejected that. I said, if God determines something, it shall come to pass. No man can thwart. Nothing happens outside the will and the power of God. Now, Matt, the reason why, and I'm glad, okay, I get your point, what you're trying to say, but again, the whole underlying point that I'm trying to make is when you say freely rebelled in the garden. Again, Matt, what I'm simply saying, I understand he made the choice, okay, that made the choice to sin in the garden. But a question I'm trying to ask is, how is it free? Free, again, in what way was he free? Again, since we're, again, you obviously know where I'm trying to get to with this. Are you saying he was free from God to choice? There's no need to keep bringing up the coercion argument because I don't believe God coerces anybody. I believe he determines it. Therefore, it shall come to pass. You can't equate determinism with coercion, Matt. That's an argument that I'm not trying to make because as shared before, determinism is referenced all throughout the Bible. So innumerable reference to that. So again, I'm just going to ask one more time. If you're not going to answer it, I'd like to move on to the next point, and then I'd like to answer your questions to be respectful to your time. Now, what I'm asking you is, again, think about it, Matt. This is a great important point that we can bring up for our audience. If God made creation and everything was good, so the question I'm going to figure out is, where did it come from that caused, again, Adam to sin in the garden? Exactly how was he free to rebel in the garden? That's an important question I'd like to hear you answer.
You broke up. How did God say the last sentence? Sorry, what?
How was Adam free from God to rebel in the garden?
I don't say he was free from God.
Okay. Then I'll stick with that. I'm okay with that then, because again, that's why, very respectfully, Matt, this is one of the reasons I wish you would lose the word free. Because again, it's okay to say he makes a choice. It's okay to say that but again, the issue that really we could wrestle with today is, again, if God created everything in the garden and everything was good, where did the sin come from that caused him to fall? And exactly how was he free to eat? Exactly free. In what way was he free? So again, the whole point and the whole contention I'm trying to make out is, how was he free? If God determines all things, why import the word free? That's a major contention. But let's move on. I don't want to beat a dead horse on this.
Because it depends on how we define free. That's all. That's what it comes down to, what free will is. They all come down to definitions, which is why I believe it's so important. This is what I do in my radio show. It's what I do constantly. What do you mean by this? And people often think I'm just being ridiculous. I say, no, I'm not. I need very specific, because then I can analyze your position. That's how I work. And so Adam was not independent of God. He was not free from God. But I have a question. Did the sin that occurred in the garden, did it come from God?
Well, Matt, leave me 1 second. I'm going to answer your questions, but please, I really want to get a couple questions answered, and I promise you I'll move on to you.
Okay.
Now, Matt, but here's why. When you say you're trying to be precise, and I respect it. I'm not trying, again,
You're breaking up. Repeat. You're breaking up. Repeat it.
Okay. I'm not trying to intentionally incite you, okay? But I'm reading your definition, Matt. You say human free will is compatible with God's absolute divine sovereignty. This is my fundamental issue. I have no problem with you saying that, divine sovereignty determines man's choices. Or you could say that man's choices are compatible with divine sovereignty because God determines man's choices. But you say free. Therefore, the question, again, comes up for me is, if you are telling me that your arguments are precise, I'm sorry, Matt, but the moment you import the word free and the context that's relative from divine sovereignty, again, Matt, this is just a simple, I said before, determines all things, then how can man be free from God's divine sovereignty?
We're talking past each other. I never say that man is free from and non-contingent upon, independent of God's sovereignty. I never say that.
You say human
never
free will is compatible. You said free will is compatible with divine sovereignty.
Yeah, but this is why we need. Yeah, but it's not free. It's free will. What's the definition of human free will? That's why I keep going. I keep saying, but we haven't gotten to what it really is. That's why I had to listen to you and develop what your definition of free will is. It's taken a long time. You say that
Okay,
we
I'm
have
going to move on.
wills. Wait, that free will is not caused. I'm trying to rush through this, and I'm trying to keep up with you, so I don't have the time to formulate it perfectly for you. But he says that we have wills, just not a will that's independent of God. And I think you think that I mean free will is independent of God. I don't believe that. That's why definitions are so important.
That's why I don't use the word free in the context of being relative to divine sovereignty. It can't be free if God determined all things and God's always sovereign. But I'm going to move on, Matt. I'm going to move on.
You mean it can't?
Here's the next.
You mean it can't be free and independent of God in that sense of free? I would agree with you.
Okay. I appreciate you clarifying that. Okay. The next one, and we'll get to this, and then I promise you, once you respond to this, then I'm going to answer you said, we see here that God predestined but not caused people to do sinful things. I'd like to know, since you cite Acts 4:27, the word, again, proorizo, if God has, again, predestined man to do sinful things, how can predestined mean cause? Are you saying there's no causal efficacy in God's predestinating plan? Exactly. How can God predestine something but that not be the cause of them doing sinful things? I'd like to know.
Are you familiar with the different ideas within causation and different theories about causation, direct and indirect?
Absolutely.
Okay. So then when I go to Acts 4:27 and I say God, proorizo, predestines the four groups, Pontius Pilate, Herod, the Jews, the Gentiles, to do whatever God's hand predestined for them to occur, and they sinned in order to do that. God predestined their sin. I have no problem saying that. But I will say that God did not cause them to sin in the direct sense. And what I mean by that is this. If I was over your house and hypothetically, if I had you in a chokehold, or I don't know, it's a stupid illustration, and I'm forcing you to walk out a door. That's what I understand by causation. Someone holds you, forces you, overpowers you, and causes you and makes you do it. That's what I mean by causation. God doesn't cause us and force us and make us sin. I hope you don't say that he does.
Okay, now let me ask you again in clarification on this. I'm not, and again, respectfully, I'm not asking for a hypothetical scenario. I'm asking for you, if you say God predestined people to sinful things, but he doesn't cause it. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that, God is the efficient cause, because it's not God who's sinning. But how can God predestine people to do sinful things, but not have this be the ultimate cause? Especially since you cite Acts 4:27.
You broke up your head. How can God predestine things yet, and then you broke up?
Okay. How can God predestine something for individuals to do sinful things, but now you're running from the argument, respectfully, when you're saying that predestination here does not mean ultimate cause. You're eliminating an ultimate cause, okay? I understand the secondary causes. I'm well informed that human beings are the efficient cause. They're the ones that are sinning. But who caused it? According to the Bible, again, Acts 4:27, according to you, proorizo, he predestined them to do sinful things. How does predestine here not, again, mean the ultimate cause?
Well, I didn't
outside
say
of the hypothetical scenario.
I didn't say that he's not the ultimate cause here. God predestines, and I don't know how he predestines and brings people to do things, and he is not the author of their sin. So what we're doing is we're talking past each other in different ways. If I were to say to you, I don't know how God predestines, that's fine. The Bible doesn't reveal how he does that. If I were to say, I don't know how God predestines and brings us to the place where sin occurs because of his foreordination and predestination, yet he's not responsible, yet we are, I can't say that I have a great answer. I can work things out and I can talk about direct and indirect causation and we can get to some deeper things. But no, I don't say that God is the direct cause. When I mean direct cause, he puts his hand on your hand and forces you to pull the trigger, and now you're the one responsible. That's the direct cause, and I think this is the problem we're having, because I agree with you that God is the ultimate cause in the sense that the predetermined thing that God did in his eternal decrees and intertrinitarian communion before the foundation of the world, where all things were predestined to occur. Absolutely. Even our sinful actions are predestined to occur, and God has worked and willed that they occur by his decretive, prescriptive, and his permissive will. I have no problem with that. How that exactly works out, I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because God doesn't reveal it to us.
Matt, I'm not asking you, how does that look? How does that work out? I'm not asking you that, Matt. Let me say this one more time. Matt, you just said, I'm not saying God is not ultimate cause. Matt, let me quote your article again. We see here that God predestined, but not caused people to do sinful things. If you're telling me, Matt, you're telling me something different than what I read here in the article. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I need glasses. Because you're not saying God is not the ultimate. But your article says God predestined, but not caused people to do sinful things. So, Matt, have you changed your mind on what you wrote? And if you did, I'd be happy to hear it. Because you keep saying, again, that you're running off into arguments about, I'm not this actually how it works out. I'm simply asking you to clarify in your words. If you're saying that you're not saying that God is not the ultimate cause of all things, or God is the ultimate cause, but again, your article here says, we see here that God predestined, but not caused. You're saying different now. Which one is it, Matt?
The problem is that you keep saying no disrespect, man. I'm going to return the favor. As was illustrated very well, I think, by the inability for us to come quickly to an understanding of what you mean free will is. I had to listen to you several times, different ways, in order to understand what you meant by free will, then come out and write it out for you, and then you said, okay. And then when I talk to you about stuff like this, you want me to answer a direct question. I'm trying to answer a direct question, but unfortunately, sometimes a direct answer is not possible. Because you said, how can God predestine and also not cause people to sin? That's what your question is, right? How can God predestine someone and also not cause them to sin? That's your question? Is that right? I'm trying to make sure I understand your question, because I'm going to answer. If that's the question, I'm going to answer it.
I'm all ears.
Is that the question, though? That is the question?
The question is, how can God predestine people to do sinful things, but not the causes? What you're telling us is something different from what I'm reading from your exact article.
Not be the cause their sin. I'm trying to get this exactly so I represent you accurately. So your question is, how can God predestine people to do sinful things and not be the cause of their sin, right?
That's correct.
Okay. The problem here is, and you should know this, that there's different senses in which the word cause can be understood. And this is a serious discussion about the nature of God himself. But I will say, just to skip ahead, God doesn't cause people to sin, not in the direct sense. And I've said this numerous times. Not the direct sense. He doesn't take your hand, put it on your hand, on the gun, pull the trigger and say, you're the blame. That's a direct cause of an action. And I believe that God does not do that. He does not do that. What I do believe is that God certainly arranges all circumstances by which people will act out the free choices that they want, not independent of him, but that they will act in a manner consistent with their natures, and that God has not caused them or forced them by putting his hand on their hand and causing them to act in a manner inconsistent with their will, inconsistent with their desires, but that they're going to act in a manner consistent with their desires, and God can work with that consistency presidency and bring them to do what he desires. But he is not the author of their sin. He is not the direct cause of their sin. He can be the indirect cause, and that, for the people who are listening and want to take me out of context later, that needs to be expanded and opened and discussed later. If anybody wants to, we can talk about the indirect causation issue. Because people take me out of context all the time, so I have to say these little things. So we're having a problem here in definitions and senses. You are arguing presumptuously from your position saying it is the right one. I have to keep asking you the same questions. What do you mean by these terms? And then when you ask me the same question, I say, well, what do you mean by this? And what do you mean by that? Because that's how we have to go. And finally,
Okay.
I can't tell you how God can predestine and also not be the direct cause of their sin, because he's not the direct cause.
How about this? Ultimate cause or efficient cause? Okay, let's just stick with the ultimate, proximate, or efficient cause. Okay, let's just break down the rudimentary terms. Okay, the ultimate cause. He is the ultimate cause of the action. Okay, the proximate cause, the instrument by which the ultimate cause carries out its plan. The efficient cause, the one that's actually acting out on that specific act. Okay, so my question now, again, is when you say here that God predestined but not caused people to do sinful things, but not caused, are you saying God is not the ultimate cause or the efficient cause or the proximate cause? Which one is it?
The problem, this is a problem I have a lot of times with atheists, and you're not an atheist, not accusing you of being an atheist, of course, but you defined ultimate in a way that was tautologous and unclear. Ultimate, you said ultimate, the ultimate cause. You didn't define what the ultimate cause is. See, Sonny, define your terms. Don't use the word in a definition because it doesn't define the term. See, if you say ultimate cause, I'm going to say, well, what is the ultimate cause? I don't know what you mean by these things. I have learned this in our discussion tonight, that your definitions of things and mine are not the same thing. I've been doing this a very long time. That doesn't mean I'm right, but in a very long time, I know definitions. I say in the radio, first thing, define your terms. What do you mean? So you said ultimate cause. You define ultimate, you say the ultimate cause. Then you went proximate, which I didn't get because you broke up, and then efficient, the one acting out. So what is the ultimate cause? You can't say the ultimate cause is the ultimate cause. It doesn't help. That's nothing.
What is your questions now, please, by all means? What is your questions? This is just almost getting absurd. What's your questions, Matt?
I agree it's absurd because I can't get definitions out of you.
What's your question, Matt? I'm open to any question you have. Go ahead.
Well, okay. Do you believe that God directly, by his forceful will, I don't want to say forceful will, do you believe that God directly causes someone to sin, to do something sinful against God's own nature?
Let me answer it with the scriptures, not with hypothetical scenarios and not with running with, I don't understand your definition quotes. Samuel 24:1 says, incited David. Well, guess what, Matt? David sinned. God is the ultimate cause of David sinning. And also in 2 Samuel 24:10-14, God judged him for sinning. Okay, we know the Bible tells us that drunkenness is a sin. If you go to the Bible and you take a look at Jeremiah 13, in the Bible it tells us in Jeremiah 13:13-14 that God filled the inhabitants of the land. He does not allow it, permit it, or let it happen, or any of this passive knowledge nonsense. He says God filled the inhabitants of the land. That's referring to those that sit on David's throne, the priests, the prophets, with drunkenness. And he filled them with drunkenness. And when he did so, it's so that he could dash them. He will not spare them. Have pity upon them. That is what God is. So yes, God is the ultimate cause of all things. Maybe you didn't hear my definition when I said earlier, Matt. I said earlier in my definition, he is the ultimate cause of all things. I meant that when I said that. So if God is the ultimate cause of all things, that does not, God is the author of sin. Why? Because God does not sin. Everything God does is just. Okay? God is ex lex. The law was given to man, not to God. Sin is always ascribed to to man, never to God. God didn't reveal the law and say, hey, here's the law for you, and I have to adhere to this. God is a law to himself. Therefore, when individuals run to the argument, well, that makes God the author of sin, all they're doing is something that is consistent with their sinful nature. They're doing exactly what Adam and Eve did in the garden. Adam in the garden basically blamed the woman. The woman then blamed the devil. It's always placing the blame. And what else? What's the other alternative? If God is not the ultimate cause, are we saying that, what, God couldn't stop it? What, is God now culpable of these things taking place? Again, Matt, as I said before, no one can deny that it was God, the one who incited David to commit that act, and God judged him. But as I said before, God is not the author of sin because God does not sin. That is my argument for what I'm trying to clarify.
I think we agree a lot more than we disagree. Ultimate in our discussion means that God is the eternal initial cause of all things that come about. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
Well, I agree with that. And you also said, if I heard you right, because you were breaking up a little, that God is not the author of sin, right?
No, God is not the author of sin because God does not sin. Everything God does is just.
Good, I agree with you. And that God doesn't directly cause someone to sin. You agree with that?
God is the ultimate cause. He is not the efficient.
Dang it,
God is
broke up.
Okay. God is the ultimate cause, but he is not the efficient cause. He is not the one actually sinning. So, for instance, there's a good illustration. There is an illustration that was given by Gordon Clark, which makes perfect sense. The illustration by Gordon Clark says, if you take a look at for instance, if I take a look at this book by Charles Hodge on 1 Corinthians, God ultimately caused him to write this book. But whose name is on it? It's Charles Hodge. He is what I would call the efficient cause. He is the one that's writing the book. He will be held responsible to God, because I tell everybody, in regards to responsibility, the Bible doesn't teach absolute divine sovereignty and human freedom. The Bible teaches absolute divine sovereignty and human responsibility. Because I said before, responsibility presupposes that we will give an account to the one for whom is the one that determined and ordained all things.
I agree. I agree that God's the ultimate cause of all things, absolutely. And yet he's not the author of sin. He does not directly cause people to sin. We are the efficient cause of our sin because we act in a manner consistent with our wills and we choose to sin. And yet that is not independent of God. It's not in that sense, as you mean, free in a non-contingent sense.
Very confusing, Matt. I like how you said God, cause of all things. But again, when you go back to your definition, when you say here, we see here that God predestined but not caused people to do sinful things. That's your quote. I say God caused is the ultimate cause of them doing sinful things. You're saying we see here that God predestined but not caused people to do sinful things. God caused of them doing.
I'll tell you what, I can go through and clarify that, because it's not meant. It's not meant for this level of discussion. It's meant for the average Joe who goes in. And I tell people that when I write on CARM, I keep in mind a sophomore in high school. That's who I'm writing to. I have more sophisticated stuff elsewhere, all right? And on another website. So, I mean, I can go in there and say, he's not, footnote, he's the ultimate cause, but not the direct cause. In other words, what that means, people, is that God is the one who has initiated all things, and nothing can occur without his divine sovereign will, Ephesians 1:11. But he's not the author of their sin. They're the ones who choose to sin, and they're responsible because they are the efficient cause of their own sin, not God. So I could write that, but that's not what the intention of that article was.
Well, why don't you just go on record then, Matt, and just say, I reject that man is free, that's relative to God, and just admit you're a determinist and abandon this whole compatibilist stuff.
No, because I believe that we have the ability to be able to act freely according to our nature, but it's not independent of God. Jesus had free will. Would you agree? free will.
Absolutely.
Was
Absolutely.
Jesus a man? Or is Jesus a man?
He is I wouldn't just say he's just man and leave out his divinity. Of course, he is the God man, yes.
So he has hypostatic union, he's God man, and he has free will, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so
No questions
does the
asked.
Bible teach that there's free will in man?
God, as my whole entire
Yes.
God has free will. Man does not.
Are the attributes of both natures ascribed to the single person in Christ, the
Indissolubly
communicatio
joined.
idiomatum?
Indissolubly joined. I believe in the Chalcedonian definition of the hypostatic union. There's no question there, Matt. There's not a question.
The hypostatic union is different than the communicatio idiomatum.
Pardon?
Boy, it went bad. It just went bad for like 10 seconds. I couldn't hear anything you said. The hypostatic union is different than the communicatio idiomatum.
No, I'm well aware what the term means. It's a communion of properties. I'm well aware what you're referring to. My point of contention is not with the communicatio idiomatum. I'm arguing anything about that. I'm talking right now about human free will. I'm talking about you and I. I'm not talking about my Lord and Savior. I'm not talking about God the Father. I'm not talking about any person in the Trinity, man. I'm talking about you and I. That's my point of contention. We do not have free will that's relative to God. That's my point of contention. We have choices.
The debate
we act according
is about,
to
does the Bible... Sorry. The debate is about, does the Bible teach free will? Yes, God has free will, so yes, it teaches that. Jesus has free will, yes, it teaches that. The attributes of both natures are ascribed to the single person of Christ. He's one person with two distinct natures. Therefore, Jesus could not have sinned. Therefore, Jesus had the qualities and attributes of divinity in his personhood, and therefore Jesus, the person, had the ability to be able to have free will. And he could say on the cross, I'm thirsty, demonstrating the attributes of humanity. I will be with you always, even in the earth, John 17:5, saying that he, Matthew 28:18 and through 20, demonstrating that he is claiming the divine attributes as well. So the person of Christ had complete free will, right?
I believe Jesus Christ, God the Father, have absolute free will, and they are the only ones. I don't know why that's even...
Okay.
Why I'm not...
So did the man Jesus, as a man, now I'm not an historian here, but did the man Jesus, was he sent in the incarnation by the sovereign decree of God?
I believe Jesus Christ was by the Father, yes. The person of Christ was sent by, yes.
Okay. And so Jesus had free will, and Jesus operated with the sovereign decrees of God in his free will. That's called compatibilism.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, again, Matt, but you're talking again. The issue in your article, Matt, you're not saying anything about Jesus Christ having free will, Matt. I'm looking at your article here on what is compatibilism and is it biblical. You're saying human free will choices, free will is compatible with God's absolute divine sovereignty.
Is Jesus human?
God and man. So
Jesus is human, and Jesus human. You know what dithelitism is, right?
I'm not. My argument. I am in no way trying to argue or dispute the person of Christ's free will. It's not a point of contention, Matt. I don't know if you're bringing this up, and it's not something I'm trying to refute. Let me say it again, Matt.
Well,
Christ has free will, and so does the Father. Okay.
Well, I'm just showing that Christ. I'm just showing that Jesus, that the actions of Christ demonstrate compatibilist free will. Since Jesus is God, he had free will, and it was his free will in concert with the sovereign decrees of God. Therefore, compatibilism is true, at the very least, in the person of Christ, right?
Everything Jesus does in accordance with the Father. There is a circumcision. There is absolute unity
John 8:29.
within the final distinctions of the Godhead. Not a point of contention here, Matt. I'm not referring to that, Matt. And I think you know that.
So then you agree that Jesus, who had free will, did only what he could see the Father did by his sovereign decree. That's compatibilism, that the free will is compatible with God's sovereign decrees. You would agree that that's true with Jesus, right?
Matt, Matt, I'm wondering how many times you're going to keep asking me this. I'm talking about again, God's creation. Okay? That's what I'm referring to, Matt. I'm not sure why your whole emphasis tonight is, if you hold a compatibilism, why don't you sit here and defend it? Why don't you sit here and defend, the so-called man has free will that's compatible with divine sovereignty? Why don't you defend some of the positions you say here in your article? You seem to be kind of running from it, Matt. I'm kind of curious why you keep running to an argument that you seem to try to be making an argument that I'm not trying to refute. I'm not trying to refute Jesus Christ does not have free will. I'm not trying to refute that somehow, the debate title is, does the Bible teach we have free will? And you're trying to make an argument about God. That's not my point of contention, Matt. I think you know that. I'm not trying to, again, I'm not trying to play a game here. I'm trying to have a serious discussion in regards to the concept of arguing that an individual has free will relative to God. I'm talking about God's creatures. And I think you're well aware of that, Matt. Because again, I'm not sure what you're referring to or what argument or what article or book I have ever written on questioning whether or not God or Christ has free will. Okay? So again, the whole
is the human nature of Christ the creation of God?
Oh my goodness, Matt, again, my point of contention tonight is not to debate Christology. It's not here to debate whether or not Christ or God has free will. And again, I'm hoping the moderator is listening, because we agreed to debate the topic, does the Bible teach free will? And again, I'm hoping we're going to get to the discussion about compatibilism or libertarianism, and we're going to kind of stop this game what we're playing right now, going back to an argument that I'm not making, nor am I trying to refute.
I think you're stuck. Because Jesus, you admitted he has free will. Jesus is a man. You say you talked about creation. The human nature of Christ is a creation of God. Therefore, it falls under the purview and the requirements of what you yourself said. Jesus has free will. You said it's a divine free will. That's fine. It has free will, and he's a man. And that, because of the communicatio idiomatum, that free will is ascribed to him as a person. And his free will is compatible with the sovereign decrees of God. That is compatibilism. Would you agree that Jesus' free will, as you said he has, is compatible with God's sovereign decrees over the Son?
I've already answered your question.
Is that a yes or no?
You're going to really waste this precious time? You're going to really waste this precious time that we have to debate a serious topic? I mean,
yes
seriously,
no?
Why did you even agree to take this honest debate, man? I've already made it very clear there is perfect unity and harmony within, again, the triune nature of God. There's no contention, Matt. I'm referring to creatures. I'm not referring to the creator. I'm making it very clear. I'm standing against the issue of compatibilists, human free will.
Is that the debate topic? Creatures?
Against, again, the topic of libertarianism.
The topic is, does the Bible teach free will?
Well, Matt, let me just leave you at this, Matt. I said before, I'm not contending or disputing Christ's free will or God's free will. I'm wondering how many more times are you going to keep asking me that question when I'm already made it abundantly clear. I believe they have free will. So that's the question.
And you can see the Bible does teach free will. And, I'm sorry, you froze. I thought you were done. Then you're not done, and he catches up. Sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
As I said before, yes, God has free will. Okay? I'm pretty much becoming a canard now. He said he believes in free will. I don't know how many times I have to keep telling you this. Now, again, are we going to get back to the discussion about so-called creaturely free will in regards to, again, the argument that human free will is compatible with absolute divine sovereignty? Because I don't believe in here your argument and your compatibilist argument. Christ, again, trying to make an argument about
I've already talked about the article. It wasn't intended for this level of discussion. I already told you that. Now, is the human nature of Christ creaturely?
Matt, I'm talking about creatures. We are creatures. Jesus Christ
is the human nature
of
Christ creature?
He is the intermediate agent. As I said before, we're not here to debate Christology. We're not here to debate. I'm not interested in debating.
I'm debating it. You see, this is the thing.
Or God has free will.
You said creaturely free will. Creaturely free will. Now, folks, if you don't know, Jesus has two distinct natures called hypostatic union, and each nature has a will. This is called ditheletism, a will of the flesh, so to speak, will of the human nature and the will of the divine nature. They come together as one person manifested as a single will. This is the Orthodox doctrine, dithelitism, not monothelitism, which means one will. There's two, one in each nature. That's orthodoxy. Now, the human nature, by logical definition, is creaturely because it's a creation of God, because the human nature is not eternal as only God is. Therefore, since you said we're discussing creaturely free will, then that automatically qualifies the human nature of Christ under the creaturely free will. Furthermore, since the doctrine of the communicatio idiomatum teaches that the attributes of both natures are ascribed to the single person, then we can say that the creaturely free will is included in the issue of Christ's free will, which you've admitted he has, and which you have to admit that Christ's free will operates compatibilistically with the doctrine, with the truth of God the Father's sovereign decrees and will. That means that his creaturely free will falls under that compatibilistic issue.
Okay, moderator, do you want to open it up for questions for the audience so we can ask some serious questions in regards to the issue of compatibilism or libertarianism, so we can have...
Yeah, actually, time has just expired, so... Right on time. It's 7:31, my time. Hey, I think you guys are really. I think you guys are really getting into it, man. So, I mean, I think the content of the discussion
I think we agree
is solid.
more than we disagree.
I do believe you guys agree more than you disagree. Excuse me. So, when we're talking about free will, we're talking about does the Bible teach free will? Matt, what biblical verse do you have that supports your position as the Bible teaches free will? Is there a biblical reference that you can go to that supports that position?
I kind of think it's like asking, is there a biblical verse that supports the Trinity? Well, it depends on how you want to look at things. Is there a single verse that it implies, a single verse that says we have compatibilistic free will? Well, I wouldn't say a single verse, not necessarily off the top of my head, but I would definitely appeal to Christ and what he said in John 8:29, John 5:19, John 5:30, and God's predestination and eternal decrees out of Hebrews 13:20. And I think we could put those together, and how God works all things after the counsel of his will, Ephesians 1:11, and then we could say that, yeah, there is that freedom there. Now, but I'm going to say something here. One of the things I'm enjoying about talking with Sonny is that it's forcing me I have to articulate things even better. And I have no problem with that. I think it's necessary to articulate things and define things even better, because I really do think that we have not plumbed the sufficient depths of the definition of what free will is. But nevertheless, I think those are the verses that we could go to as an example.
What about you, Sonny? You think those verses, while they may not state the term free will or give an exact reference to free will, do you think combining those verses together, they give the implications of free will in the same way that if we look at the divinity of Christ, we look at his nature, we look at the triune nature of God, though the word Trinity is not there, do you think that the implications of what the text is saying, of course you agree with me that it teaches the Trinity, but in the same way that those verses that Matt brought to the surface gives the implication of there being a compatibilistic free will in the human, in creaturely, in the creature?
Okay, yeah, great question. I'll just tell you this. First, again, my point of contention, Marlon, and I'm sure you're well aware of this by now, is my argument tonight is not the question of whether or not Jesus or God has free will. I've already made it abundantly clear they are the only ones that have free will. Okay? I come off like I'm playing a game here. The second thing to answer is I think the Bible is so explicit and pervasive that God has determined all things. Therefore, free will is impossible in human beings. For instance, I'll give you an example. In Acts 17, it literally tells us that God has determined our pre-appointed times in the boundaries of our dwellings. It literally says determined our pre-appointed times in the boundaries of our dwellings. It literally tells us in the book of Philippians chapter 2, when God works in you to will and to work. If you think about all the examples that I referenced earlier from the Old Testament, when it tells us that the to the left, but its every decision is from the Lord. So even an individual today that were to say things like, oh no, I have free will, watch this. I have free will to raise my right hand. I have free will to raise my left hand. You see, I did that on my own accord. I'm free to do so. Really? Well, the problem is that's not how we see prophets and teachers explain things. You see, when with Job, Job didn't say, God allows it, God permits it, God lets it happen, God has passive knowledge, a passive decree, and man has free choice to act compatible with God's divine sovereignty. No. What Job actually did, Marlon, and was actually beautiful. And Job 23, starting, I believe it's 13 through 14, where he literally says, you know, whatever God desires, he does, and he performs what is appointed for me, what is appointed. And you see, he had no problem addressing the fact that God has appointed everything, and he performs it. Keep in mind the word that's actually used there, it's the word hok. That same word is the same word used in Proverbs 8 when it says that literally he had appointed the foundations of the earth. So when I see these examples in the Bible, and also when an individual tries to speak contemptuously and says, watch, I have free will to act in a way that's compatible with divine sovereignty. See, I'm speaking to you right now, and typically you're going to hear a lot of semi-Pelagians and a lot of these so-called Molinists. They say a bunch of stupid arguments, and here's what they say. They say things like, did you freely decide to debate tonight? No, I didn't freely decide. I believe that God has ordained it. In the book of Lamentation 3, it says, who has spoken a word and it come to pass unless it has been commanded by God? Who has spoken a word and it comes to pass unless it has been commanded by God? And it says, is it not out of the mouth of the Most High that both good and bad come? So again, any of these philosophical arguments that individuals make, I'd argue, are nothing more than claptrap, because the Bible explicitly teaches that God has determined all things and no man can thwart that, because nothing happens outside of God's will and power. That's why I reject the idea and the notions of free will that's relative to God. Nothing is. God ordained all things.
Okay. All right. So let's jump into some of these questions, because I think you guys got some good questions here. All right. And this one is for you, Sonny. You see a pop-up at the bottom right here, Sonny, on the screen. And it says, Sonny Hernandez, how is God glorified by determining for man to rape and murder each other?
Well, that's an interesting question, because what that individual is trying to do is trying to use something to incite others. Well, I can tell you something far worse than rape. It's the murder of Jesus Christ. And according to the Bible, he was delivered according to the, guess what? Determined man and the foreknowledge of God the Father. And also tells us in Acts 4:27-28. It tells us explicitly that the Herod and Pontius, the Gentiles and the people of Israel, to do exactly as God's hand had predestined to take place. Think about even Judas Iscariot. What do you mean? How is God by this? As I said before, Psalm 115, Psalm 135 tells us God does as he pleases. Think about Judas Iscariot, the one that would betray the Son of God with a kiss, the one that would actually sell his Savior for 30 pieces of silver. But according, again, to Isaiah 41, Isaiah 55, Zechariah, again, prophesied that it was him. Even Jesus Christ said, did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is the devil? Does he not say that? So again, the reality goes back to, again, I think if you think about passages, let's say, I'm trying to think of certain passages where it tells us that God does these things. So for instance, it'd be like asking, why does God reprobate someone? Well, he does it, again, so he can declare his power and declare his name all throughout the earth. There is a specific plan that God has for everything. Does God reveal to us everything that's explicitly stated in his decree? No. What we have is preceptive will. But again, I only claim to know the decree which God has revealed to us. But if it's not revealed to us, we can only say that God has a specific plan and purpose for all things.
But God does not, hold on. But God does not cause, like, does God manipulate the heart of an individual, giving, I guess, essentially giving new sin, giving new evil to someone's heart that they don't have, in order to get them to act in the desire, in the way that would accomplish God's will?
Well, that's a good question, and I'll just tell you this: God is the ultimate cause of things, but as said before in my discussion with Matt, God is not the efficient cause. In other words, it's not God doing the rape, but God is the ultimate cause of that actually taking place.
Because of his decree.
Yeah, because of his decree. God ordained all things. And the moment somebody says God did not ordain all things, then what they're arguing, or what this presupposes, is that there's some metaphysical power in the universe that operates independent from God that has caused something to take place outside of God's foreknowledge. Well, I take a look at foreknowledge in the same way I take a look at foreordination. It's the same side of the coin. That's my position. But in regards to how God actively works in individuals, well, let me just tell you this. A good passage to bring up is Revelation 17:17. It literally says God put it in their heart to agree and to give their kingdom over to the beast. That's a great example that the Bible uses. Think about the king of Heshbon, the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy, the Bible literally says that God hardened his heart and made it obdurate. Exodus 4:21. God had, again, how many times did God harden Pharaoh's heart? Some 18 times? The Bible is explicit about these passages. And again, the reality, I tell everybody, if they think that by using something to incite others is somehow going to justify their position, I'm not here to make a truth based on, something that is melodramatic or because it may, again, stir a pejorative debate. I'm not arguing these things just because I'm sadistic and I just like to sit in the mirror and laugh because I'm saying God does wicked and cruel things. I'm here as a Bible preacher to testify to what does the Bible say, not hypotheticals. Again, I don't rely on antinomy, mystery, paradox, or God allows, permits, or any of this passive knowledge nonsense. There is nothing passive about God. Nothing. He actively all things. That is a position I will stand by. And again, I'll be more than happy to debate on that topic. Name a person, I'll be more than happy to debate that topic.
What do you think, Matt? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I basically agree with basically everything he's saying. Basically, not every single thing. Here, there's nothing passive in God. I think that's something that we could ferret out some. But I understand what he's saying. When I'm on the radio and I'm talking, I have to be careful how I speak because people can misunderstand something. And if I say something is too technically correct, so many people, well, this happened to me many times, don't understand the whole context. I remember when James White was on a show and I heard them ask him a question, does God ordain sin? And he said, yes, because he does. And then they say, oh, so you're saying he's guilty of it. No, it's not what he's saying. And they wouldn't let him explain. And this is the kind of thing I think in a discussion like this, because this is a difficult topic. It's a difficult topic because there are nuances and variations of meanings of things. And I'm not trying to be difficult and obfuscate things. It's just a fact. I think Sonny would agree that there are definitions and ways that things can be meant. And, it's three different causes. There's three ideas of three different levels of causation. Yeah, I would agree. And to say that God is the ultimate cause, I would agree he's the ultimate cause, but he's not what we would call I like to say, to help most people, the direct cause in that he has his hand on it. He's not the efficient cause in that sense. So I agree. Now, the passive action of God, that's something I would like to, explore further sometime. Does God, now here's a question, because it's not that easy. Does God sit back and let something happen? Well, the only way it would happen anyway, if he let it happen, is because it was in his will for it to happen. So this is really, it's difficult. So anyway, having said that, I would agree with most of everything he has said. I do. We have a few differences of some issues on some things. I think those are significant. I'll just leave it at that. We agree on most everything.
Okay. All right. So next question. This is for you, Matt.
Okay.
All right. Aren't you minimizing the severity of the fall by likening God's perfect sovereign free will as man's fallen myopic decisions?
I did not understand the question. Please say it again.
Aren't you minimizing the severity of the fall by likening God's perfect sovereign free will and man's fallen myopic decisions?
I don't know what he means by likening it in a myopic sense. So I'm not sure I understand the question. Sonny, do you know that I have Asperger's?
I would say if
I'm
you can
autistic.
ask the person.
So it's part of me to ask questions like this. Is how I think. Okay, I'm not being difficult. So when he asked a question, I'm not sure I understand what he means by the question. Seriously,
I don't understand
I'm
it.
not
Maybe
huh?
to clarify his position, that would help.
All right, we'll just move on to the next question.
You don't understand the question either?
I don't understand.
So sometimes I don't understand people's questions. I'm sorry, what'd you say, Sonny?
I would say, I would kindly ask the gentleman if he could maybe clarify a little bit. I'm not really understanding what the question is.
Thanks.
Okay.
It wasn't just me then. Thank you.
All right, no, no problem.
I thought it was just me.
We'll just transition to the next question. No big deal.
Okay.
All right, this is for you, Sonny. And it says, do you believe Matt is saved since he doesn't agree with you?
Well, the reality is I'm not sure why somebody would ask me what I think. The topic of tonight's debate is, biblical view of free will. I don't care what that individual thinks or what, no offense, what either one of you guys think. I care what the Bible says. So again, if an individual wants to have a discussion on is this person saved or is this person not saved, have at it. I'm here to debate what does the Bible teach. I'm not here to debate hypotheticals. I'm not here to debate what I think. I'm debating what does it teach. That's the whole purpose of why we came here and why we're opening this time to a
Yeah, it sounded like you went out. Sonny, you there? Yeah, it sounded like we lost you for a minute there, Sonny.
Yes, I can hear. I broke
Okay.
up for a minute, but
Okay.
yeah, I can hear.
All right, no problem. All right, Matt, do you care to address this question? I don't think you do. I don't think you really care to address that question, right?
Am I saved? Yeah. Jesus saved me.
All right, so next question. Here it is. All right, once again for you, Sonny. All right, Mr. Daniel Allgood. It says for Sonny, if from the outset he denies human free will, why even have this debate? Both his and Matt's thoughts and words are determined already. It's a vicious circle.
That question is intentionally stupefying, and I'll tell you why. Why do we have that? Does the Bible command us to question God's eternal decree? Or does the Bible give us his preceptive will, which he commands us? In other words, the preceptive will reveals man's obligations. What does God do? The decree is essentially what caused it. I'm not sure what Bible passage he's referring to say, well, why have this debate if it's already been decided? That is a typical argument I typically hear from semi-Pelagians to try to make an argument that, well, if God decrees all things, then why even have this discussion? Well, again, we have this discussion, and here's why we have this discussion. God ordained it to take place. The very same reason why I referenced in the scriptures earlier, when the Bible tells us that the king's heart is in the hand of God. Like the rivers of the water, he turns it whichever way he wants. He controls our thoughts. And it doesn't matter how many of these silly philosophical arguments or this type of claptrap that people ask, it doesn't change that. God has ordained all things. And if people want to rely on an argument to say, well, then why even have this debate? Have at it. It's viciously circular hearing these same ignorant comments. I would just say, what does the Bible teach? Let's focus on that.
Okay. Matt Slick, any thoughts?
Well, I don't think it's a dumb question to ask. I think that if we understand free will to mean that we don't have any ability to make choices within our own selves and that everything's determined, then it is logical to ask what's the purpose of the debate. But I think to answer that question means we have to define terms because what does the person mean in the terms he's using as he asked the question? And so I think that's really where the issue would lie in that. I think it's a worthy question because it would encourage discussion and definitions between parties. So.
Okay. All right, next question. First for you, Sonny. They love you out here, Sonny.
I'll answer any question.
It's a question for Sonny. Since you were
What's your bank code?
You ain't gonna answer that question, Sonny.
He said it, he questioned.
All right, so question for Sonny. Since you assert there is no free will among men, Is it your belief that God determined you to debate Matt on this topic tonight?
I think it's obvious. That's what, obviously, since we're having the debate tonight, clearly this was determined by God. It's obvious. I think the question, pretty much, that we're on the radio tonight and the fact that we are debating one another is proof that that is the case. So yes, that's a simple question. A simple response I could provide. So.
All right. Anything, Matt?
I would agree. I would agree. But I think that the question, again, definitions. But yeah, God preordained that we would have this debate from before the foundation of the world.
All right. Next question. Sonny Hernandez, what is your interpretation of Luke 7:30?
Well, let me look up what Luke 7:30 says.
All right. I think I can get it for you.
I can read it. I got it. But the Pharisees and the lawyers rejected God's purpose for themselves, not having been baptized by John.
Okay, but the Pharisees and the lawyers rejected the purpose of God for themselves, not having been baptized by him. I mean, what's my interpretation is I actually believe exactly what the Bible says. But it's important to note that this speaks nothing about the metaphysical cause. So it's a good question. I think there's many passages in the Bible that tell us examples where it says things like, they rejected the purpose of God for themselves, or they acted on their own accord. But again, this speaks nothing to, again, the metaphysical cause. It's just simply a statement that's telling us that acted it. Hey, I argue that God has determined for them to reject it. Again, we all have a command. As I said before, we have the preceptive will. That, as I said before, what is man's obligation to God. Therefore, if they reject that, they're rejecting the purpose that God has for them. But that does not the will of decree. That is that which caused them to reject the purposes of God. It doesn't address that. It just merely addresses that rejecting something that God has explicitly commanded for them, or something that God has, again, allotted for them. But it's a simple question to go to, and I would just make the distinction between his will of precept, also given in the form of a command, and his will of decree. Simple response.
All right. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm along the same lines. There's a preceptive, or we also call it prescriptive will. There's certain things God wants people to do, and then he ordains that they don't. Now, if people think that that's not the case, I've got an article on my website, calvinistcorner.com, and you can go up and read, is it God's will that all be saved? And what we have in there are instances where God wants one thing or reveals one thing and arranges something else. And this is all within God's sovereign plan and his sovereign will. The article's a difficult read sometimes, but it's worth checking out if you're interested in further information on this.
Okay.
Marlon, let me address one more thing on that, please. It's a good question. Now, let me explain something, because I'll give you an example. I want to give a real good example I don't know if it's a gentleman, forgive me, but let me just quote a passage from the book of Philemon. And in verse 14, because I think it's important to remember is that, again, I'm arguing that there is no freedom relative to God. That's why I will never make a definition to say that our free will is compatible with divine sovereignty. I'll never say those things. I will simply argue that yes, we make a choice, we act according to our nature, but I never import the word free. However, in a sense, if we say relative to another person, so for instance, I could tell you right now, Marlon, you are not controlling my actions. You are not controlling my decisions. You don't know what I'm about to say next. Therefore, I'm free in a sense from you, but that doesn't mean I have free will. It's relative to something referring to you. So, for instance, we see an example of this, and I think this will help to maybe bring some more context into something else that when I bring up like the will of command and the will of decree. But in Philemon, in verse 14, it says, but notice it's Paul speaking. He says, but I prefer to do nothing without your consent, in order that your goodness might not be by compulsion, but of your own accord. Now, keep in mind the context here. He's speaking about the relationship between Paul and Philemon. It's not Philemon and God, or between Paul and God, is between Paul and Philemon. So if we see voluminous passages in the Bible, so if somebody has a question and they want to show an example like this, again, the context is going to have to determine how we make this argument, because again, the same thing in this passage to the same thing in the question they want to have a third. It doesn't say anything about a metaphysical cause or a metaphysical relationship in causation between God and Philemon. It just merely references, again, a relationship that's relative between Paul and Philemon. I have no problem somebody saying that we're free in that sense, but a major problem with someone saying that it is relative to God. That's my major point of contention. So good question. I appreciate the question that was brought.
All right. Any thoughts, Matt?
No, because we're almost over. I know there's probably another question or two.
Yep. All right. This one for you, Matt. Can man make a free, non-coerced choice contrary to what God has determined?
No.
And I'm sure you agree, Sonny.
Well, but here's the problem. And again, I say, again, Matt, notice the reference to non-coerced. Now, again, I would simply say that I don't like the word coerced. Okay, let me just say that right now. That's not what the person is asking. This is a good question. And I need to, hopefully, if I can read it, my vision is bad because this is very small for me to read. Can man make a free, non-coerced choice contrary to what God? I don't believe man can make anything free. But again, I would never use the word coerce because God didn't coerce anybody. Before, the reason why the word coerced should be abandoned is because it implies God does not have absolute control over his creation and that man can't resist. I believe that God ordained something. Again, man can't thwart that. It will happen. If the Bible doesn't maybe not tell us what that looks at will place, it will take place. Okay, that's the one thing for certain that we know will happen. And I don't believe anybody could do, I don't believe anyone can act or think apart from divine influence. It's impossible because God has determined all things. But good question.
All right. Next question. This is for Sonny again. Does God cause people to sin? If yes, how does he hold them, his creation, responsible?
Yeah, good question. Now, I believe I already answered that. Yes, God is the ultimate cause of sin. Absolutely, God is the ultimate cause. And again, as I said before, he's not the efficient cause. And what this means, God is the ultimate cause, because remember what I said before. God controls all things. He caused all things. He sustains all things. He governs all things. And there is nothing independent of God in the universe, because the moment somebody says there is, now they're going to have to broach the idea, what is it? What meta power exists in man to make this decision? And I'd argue that's a form of dualism. That's where you run into serious implications in your argument. However, now to answer the question, how does he hold them, his creation, responsible? Well, exactly that. Because God is absolutely sovereign, a man is responsible. I believe in responsibility, and I argue any worldview that denies responsibility it's not a tenable worldview. It's clearly an unbiblical worldview. And again, as I said before, freedom, again, or responsibility does not presuppose freedom. Again, response is divine sovereignty. Remember what I said earlier in regards to context, what I referenced earlier. The question I have to ask everybody, and this gentleman, I'm not sure who it is that asked the question, but pardon, I beg your pardon if I don't want to call you sir, ma'am, I don't know. It just says, I think it says the gospel truth question. I don't see who the person is that's asking me.
It's Shai Luke. It's a dude. It's a guy.
Okay. So to the gentleman that asked the question, and is exactly this, because God determined all things, man is responsible. And again, as I said before, the question I had to tell everybody is this. When David, again, when he incited Israel, here's a question. Was that sin? Yes. According to the Bible, it was sin. When he, again, incited Israel, the Bible says it was sin and God judged him for it. Now, the question is, who is the ultimate cause? The Bible says God incited David, number Israel. And then the Bible also tells us that God, again, caused the devil. The devil was the proximate cause, meaning the proximate cause is an instrument by which God carries out his plan. God is the ultimate cause. As I said before, the Bible explicitly teaches that. again, the devil is the proximate cause, and God him for his sin. So again, this is what the Bible teaches. And I know sometimes that it may sound confusing. Oh, but it's not. I'll give you another good example. The same thing what I said before. If you take a look at Isaiah, think about all the passages. Well, the Bible says that drunkenness is sin. Yes, but does God actively cause someone and fill them with drunkenness? I referenced it earlier. Jeremiah 13 through 14. Does the Bible say that lying is wrong? Absolutely. But the Bible says, according to the Old Testament, that it was God that put lying spirits into the mouths of the prophets. It was God is the one that put lying spirits into the mouths of the prophets, of course, to overthrow Ahab. Okay, so when we see these Bible passages, it's explicit. God ordains all things, and yes, man is accountable. At times, it may, again, sound difficult to wrap our mind around, but remember, we are finite creatures. God is an infinite creator. We are fallible. God is infallible. We can't compare human terms and try to do that, hold God to some external standard that we hold ourselves to. No, God is the standard of all standards. And God is the one that has determined all things, and man is responsible for that.
Okay. Matt, any thoughts?
A lot was said. I'm going to leave it alone because I know it's late. I know you got to go. There's some questions. We're supposed to do some more stuff, so I'm not trying to say too much. I'm trying to get through it.
All right. And I think you'll find this one funny, Matt. It says to Sonny, did God cause Skylar Fiction to have a hardened heart?
Well, again, the problem is I'm really hoping for some serious question because, again, I take the Bible very serious. For individuals that, again, I don't want to judge this person's heart, but so people can ask me all day long, why have this debate if God ordained all things? If they decide to have this debate, or did God have a hardened heart? I don't know if his heart's hardened. I don't even know who this person is. Who is Skylar Fiction? Again, I only know that which the Bible tells me. Again, so when an individual, and I do get asked this at times, and again, I mean this very respectful to whoever this person is that, when individuals say, okay, so you're trying to say that you've been decreed to be saved and I'm not. I don't know. I don't even know you. Number two, you only know that which God has revealed to us. To ask me, did God harden your heart or did God decree something? Again, you're asking me questions that I don't know. I only know that which God has revealed to us. I hope I an adequate response to that person, respectfully.
All right. Matt, any thoughts?
I didn't understand what Skylar said. Sorry.
Yeah, this is it's not Skylar asked the question, it's another guy answered the question, but he said, did God cause Skylar Fiction to have a hard heart?
He certainly hardens people's hearts, and Jesus speaks in parables so people will not be saved. So you go to 2 Thessalonians 2, you can go to Mark 4, 10 through 12. Ultimately, I don't know what the case is. And you go to Romans 9, 9 through 23. God hardens whom he desires. I think it's verse 16, 14 or 16. So maybe, in a direct sense, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Two more questions, fellas. Too much questions. All right. Okay. This one's from Michael Holloway. It says, from Matt, did God decree what our desires in nature would be?
Yes.
Okay. Sonny?
Absolutely. You see, I have no problem addressing any question in regards to this because it's pretty simple. God has decreed all things. And it doesn't matter how insightful an individual wants to be. Great question, by the way, and also far as to say the fall. I know the question, and I know this is kind of outside the scope of what the question is, but again, I'll just like to throw this in there. Oh yeah, I think the Bible is pretty clear. Individuals that get asked sometimes, okay, so if God created everything good, because I want to make this question really interesting since it's referring to worship. Again, the question is, if God created everything good, then where did the evil come from that caused man to fall? God created it. God ordained it. to take place. And the reason why I hold to this position, because remember something, as I said before from the Acts, it says Jesus was delivered up according to the determined plan and foreknowledge of God. Therefore, individuals that say God didn't cause the fall, sin just came on its own. Well, who caused it? What was the metaphysical cause that again created this evil that caused Adam to sin? And the question I come back to again, I go back to the book of Acts. Did, I guess, God get lucky that Adam ate from that forbidden fruit? It's a good thing because he delivered up according to the determined plan and foreknowledge of God. Again, that's why I tell everybody, if you only hold to the proposition, God ordained all things, nothing happens outside of his eternal and immutable decree. It's a pretty simple doctrine to affirm. But good question. Very good question.
Okay. All right, it's the last question. And this is for you, Sonny. All right, there we go. And it says, I guess this is addressed to Sonny throughout the debate. It says, why are you dodging Matt's questions about Christ's free will?
I've already made it abundantly clear. Christ, again, has free will. God will. I think it's superfluous now. I made that. That's not even a point of contention. I don't think I've ever written an article. I've ever published a book. I don't think I've ever preached a sermon. I don't think I've ever made any kind of video or had any kind of podcast that ever questioned Christ's free will or God's. I believe, as I said before, Jesus Christ and God have free will. They are the only ones that have free will. Man does not. I believe I was explicit on what I said. I'm not sure why it's asking why I dodged it. I'm answering it now. I answered it to Matt. If you want to ask me again tomorrow or another time, I'll be happy to say the same thing. Jesus Christ and God have.
All right. Any thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, Christ obviously had free will, and it was compatible with the sovereign decrees of God. Hence, compatibilist free will is taught in Scriptures, at least with the person of Christ. And since the debate was about does the Bible teach free will, the answer is yes.
All right.
In a broad sense.
All right. Well, fellas, that concludes the Q&A, and that concludes this debate. Once again, I want to thank both of you for taking time out your schedules to come on and debate this topic. And I'll just go ahead, Matt.
I thought we were going to have a 5-minute closing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I didn't answer a whole bunch of stuff through too deeply, but that's okay.
My bad.
That's all right.
All right. No, I do what
I thought.
sorry about that. I do want you guys to have some closing words. So yeah, let's go into that. My bad. I told you that's my fault. That's my fault. All right. So Matt,
no, it's okay. It's all good.
Go ahead and get some closing statements, Matt. Closing words.
No, I was going to say thanks first of all for debating, Sonny. You and I agree far more than we disagree. I think the issue is with definitions, and I think you and I would need to hash out what definitions are. You'd find me a little bit annoying, not on purpose, but because I really do analyze very deeply various topics when I get into it. And does the Bible teach free will? It's such an open-ended statement that the answer has to be yes, because God has free will, and so it does. Does it teach a better debate topic might have been, does the Bible teach that fallen people have compatibilist type free will or something like that? That would have been a little bit better. Then I couldn't have pulled the issue of Christ and his free will on you because, well, but it is compatibilist free will and the issue of what Christ says and did. And so I do affirm it in free will. But I also will say I don't believe that that any of our actions and any of our decisions are independent of God. And that's what I think he means by free. Free as an independent of. I don't believe that we have freedom of will in the sense that it is self-generated within God's sovereign decrees. It's self-generated, and we can do what we want and desire according to our nature, as does God, and that we're held responsible. And I could really get into explaining that a whole bunch more, but that is really basic, and that's what I wanted to say. And I appreciate the debate, appreciate the time, and God bless. Thanks, Sonny.
All right. Sonny, you have some closing words.
No, thank you, both of you gentlemen, for your time. Clearly, as I stated in this, a lot of time that you've given us is that I don't believe that human beings have contra of freedom, nor to Matt's compatibilism, because as I said before, anytime you have in a definition that human free will is compatible with absolute divine sovereignty. The reason why I believe that to be a contradiction is because of the word free. Again, because of the fact that, as I said before, God is the ultimate cause of all things. He has determined all things. That includes the means and the ends, and that includes our choices, decisions, and our actions. Therefore, how can the will be free? In what way is the will free from God? Now, again, as I said before, I believe we make choices, we have wills, we act according to our nature, but where I reject is, again, the topic of freedom. I think, again, if you're going to hold to the argument that God is the ultimate cause of all things, nothing happens outside of the decree of God, and if you're going to hold to the argument that God determines our choices, actions, and decisions, then lose the term freedom, period. Again, it confuses things, and again, it really eschews definitions, especially say that human free will is compatible with divine sovereignty. Well, free from what? As I said before ad nauseum in our discussion, and as I said before, in no way am I trying to argue that God or Christ don't have free will. Of course we have free will. I'm not even, again, I'm still thrown away why that was even such a major topic that was being broached today. I'm still clueless. I don't understand why. I'm pretty confident Matt knew that that's not a point that I'm trying to argue, but hey, it is what it is. I'm thankful for the time. Welcome to debate this topic anytime, Marlon. If you know anyone that's serious about continuing this discussion, or that anybody wants to debate the topic of double predestination, anyone wants to address any of the essentials of Christianity, anybody at all, let me know. I'll be more than happy to come on this discussion and to defend my Savior's word. So thank you for your time, gentlemen.
All right, thank you both once again.
Okay.
Sorry about screwing up with the closing statement, but it's all good. So as always, when people come on my show, I send gifts out because I appreciate the fact that you guys take time out. Matt, your gift is on the way, so you need to be checking your PO box soon.
I don't need any gift.
Yeah, you're getting a gift, Matt. You're getting a gift. And Sonny, you're getting a gift too. So I'll be reaching out to you after the debate to get that gift over to you, Sonny. And it's just a token of my appreciation for you guys taking time out your schedule. I respect both of you guys. And just a token of my appreciation for you guys taking time out your schedule to come on.
I appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you so much,
Okay.
gentlemen.
All right, all right.
Thanks. All right.
All right. Thank you, guys. All right, folks. Another episode in the books, The Gospel Truth, where we discuss theology. And this was a heavyweight theological discussion right here. This was a heavyweight right here. And I had two guys who are definitely able to hold their own in this discussion. And that's the most appreciative thing about having these debates. When you bring two individuals on who are very adept and know their stuff and are able to argue their points sufficiently and accurately. And that's why I appreciate both of these brothers for coming on. It's important that we take in consideration this type of subject matter because a lot of these times when these definitions get thrown around and they're not accurately articulated, people come away with misunderstandings. And I see that a lot within the Christian spectrum. We have to be able to listen and be able to allow people to articulate their definitions and be able to respond correctly to those definitions so you can represent them correctly. And I feel that's what happened today, and I feel that's what Christians need to do. Even when you're not dealing with a Christian, you do with atheists or somebody who's independent of your worldview. Make sure you're representing them correctly so you can eventually preach the gospel to them. With that said, I can't leave here without preaching the gospel to you. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the show, Kobe Bryant died earlier yesterday, and his daughter also, and 6 other individuals died. And once again, it's important that you take those type of situations into consideration, because if we don't take those situations into consideration, then we can be missing the whole point. And the point is that life is frail. And we're all going to die one day. And we're all going to have our appointed time when we stand in front of the throne of grace, before the judgment throne. And I'm just praying when you stand in front of that judgment throne that you're standing on the right side of that throne. Because if you stand on the wrong side, eternal conscious torment is going to happen. But I pray that God's grace is on you, and he's calling you out of your sin, and that he draws you out of your sin into a glorious, wonderful relationship with him. And I'm praying that for you. If you don't know the gospel, Christ bled and died on the cross of Calvary. He was buried for 3 days, resurrected with all power in his hand, in order to deliver his people from his wrath. Delivering from his wrath. And that's important that you understand that. And I pray that he's calling you out of your sin and he's drawing you unto himself. With that said, I do want to go over a couple of announcements, some announcements that I have coming up. So, all right, coming up January 30th, 2020, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I have James Martin coming on, and he'll be debating Warren McGrew, and they'll be debating, is total depravity biblical? So another good Calvinism debate. So let's be on the lookout for that one. Also coming up February 1st, 2020, I have Miles Patrick, Hebrew Israelite, debating Ricky Cronin, Reformed Christian, and they're debating, is Jesus God, and the interpretation of Deuteronomy 28. That's coming up once again, February 1st, 2020 at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. All right, now I have coming up a discussion. What is atheism? Eric Murphy, atheist, and Tyler Vela, Christian. And they'll be debating once again, or having a discussion once again, what is atheism? And that's coming up February 3rd, 2020 at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And lastly, I have an interview to follow up all these debates. I have an interview coming up. Pastor John Speed, and we'll discuss his ministry, abortion in America, effectiveness of a fighting abortion, and major concerns for the Christian. That's coming up February 7th, 2020 at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That is only the next 4 shows. I have a whole slew of shows coming up. So go ahead, go to the YouTube page, the Facebook page, and like and subscribe. Cut the notification bells on. Also, subscribe on the podcast. If you're a person who just like to listen to the audio, go ahead and subscribe there so you can be in the loop. I am updating that podcast weekly with the new, fresh updates, episodes of the Gospel Truth. Also, if you want to debate on this show, if you feel you have a worthy argument, go ahead and hit me up. My email is in the description of all the shows. So go ahead and email me and let me know what your topic is, and if you have an interlocutor already lined up, or if you want me to find one, I'll gladly do the best I can to get that done. So once again, I thank you for joining me on the Gospel Truth. I thank you so much for being with me, and just take strong consideration of what your positions are, and don't be totally opposed to changing your position if it's wrong. And that's the goal of the Gospel Truth, to engage the culture with Christian truth. Once again, I'm Marlon Wilson, and I'm signing out. May God bless you, and may God keep you.